Welcome back. I'm visiting here today with Dick Buxton. He is the founder and the managing director of Private Capital Corporation, and also author of the book of Business Matters: Lessons, Life, and Leadership. So, um, we've had you on the show before,
Right.
I'm always fascinated with the legacy that you've been able to establish, and that is succession planning and leadership in the business world. But for the listeners that are tuned in now, can you let's once again review the background of your career and what brought you up today?
Well, we founded Private Capital Corporation back in 1976 primarily to provide ESOP consulting, because I had been an ESOP pioneer and I had gone on the board of one of the early ESOP companies. But after a few years, it became apparent to us that putting an employee stock ownership plan into a company was not a succession plan. Broadened ownership could increase productivity, could retain rank and file employees, but it couldn't retain management. So we developed a management stock ownership plan, which was a parallel plan to the employee stock ownership plan. And then it became important for us to help a company develop a management development program, which I'd been part of, and in fact had helped to create with a major corporation. But most mid-market companies just had never thought about it. They were too busy surviving. They had other issues to deal with, like banking, and creating second line management was kind of an afterthought. It kind of happened or didn't happen. So we made that a priority, and then we found that a lot of companies like that, and so we kind of did a segue into financial consulting for mid-market private companies. Now, we did some public company work, some very high visibility public company work, but the preponderance of our clients were mid-market private companies with 50 to 5,000 employees. And the typical company would have probably 600 to 700 employees. It'd be too big for the advisors that would normally advise a private company, and too small for the major companies that would charge $100,000 retainer just to get retained. So we had a niche market in the mid-market, and we traveled around the United States doing that until eventually we had over 1,000 examples of our work that generated continuing referrals, and we built a business.
I'm always fascinated how when you come in, you're the outsider coming in, the transition to succession planning, and to some of those founders, this is their baby. They may say, I want to retire, but not really. How do you do that?
Well, first of all, I recognize that the entrepreneur that we're dealing with is a genius. They typically have invented something or created something, and they're smart enough and they have the charisma and the presence to build around that concept, that idea, that they've attracted people, and they eventually get big enough where they can't have a daily contact with all the employees, and that's when they start losing control of the business. And they haven't learned how to delegate and deal through others. So they start looking for that kind of counsel, but very few mid-market private companies know even where to go to get that kind of counsel. I mean, human resource development is typically for the larger companies. Their CPA, if they're smart and they have someone like you, you'll say, we need to do something about a management development program. Well, where should we go to have someone help us? Well, private capital does that. Or you can't do business with 1 year renewable financing. You need to have long-term financing. Where do we get that? Well, private capital does that. We arrange that financing. We need an equity partner. Who can find that equity partner? Private capital has access to all the private equity firms in America. I've been a founder of 2 of them. It's easy to get equity if you know where to look and if you know how to structure it. So it's just that our experience has been that we deal in the mid-market, we deal with the entrepreneur, and when we meet the entrepreneur, they sense that. And we don't take the place of their accountant. We don't take the place of their attorney. We don't take the place of their wealth management advisor. we do something none of those people do, and we specialize in that.
So when you and you've done thousands of companies over the years.
Over 1,000.
When you when you're working with these entrepreneurs, you got to move them out of the way relatively quickly in order to transition.
Oh no. We typically indicate that it'll be a 3 or 4 year period of time to transition to where there's a management team in place with understanding the culture of the company, with leadership skills, so that the founder or the CEO, if they weren't the founder, can take off for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and enjoy themselves and not be in touch with the company by email or fax, and just relax and extend their life. Many times they're told by a doctor to do that or they'll die, and they can't. So a lot of people die in harness because they have never developed any secondary management program for people to run the company if they're not there running it.
You know, that's so often we get caught up in life and we forget our mortality in the process.
That's right. And all it takes is a little blood pressure that starts to be elevated, the lifestyle of 7 day a week, pushing yourself, and then all of a sudden, bang, there's a stroke.
You know,
You're out of it.
Dick, I'm running up against the break here, but when I get back, when we come back, I want to talk about, what's an appropriate time to think about the succession plan. We'll be right back after these messages.
I love fishing, with my family.
I think it would be easier to use a net.
It was so much fun.
The times when we are together, it makes it all the more worth it.
Having Dad teach them how to cast a fly rod, and
as long as we're doing stuff together, we're having fun.
Some people see a father and a son fishing together, while others see a succession plan.
Welcome back. I'm visiting here today with Dick Buxton. He's the founder of Private Capital Corporation, also the author of the book Business Matters: Lessons in Leadership and Life. And in the first segment, we were talking about when is an appropriate time to start thinking about a succession plan.
As soon as the company is big enough to afford to have a successor in-house. And that might be where you have 10 employees and you decide, I want to build to 1,000 employees and I better have someone with me from the beginning, which is what Bob Buxton did to build SAIC. He started building his succession when he had 10 employees. And he built it to the largest private company in the world with 30,000 employees, SAIC, because he had bench strength in every department. And he built a company a private company with a market cap of $10 billion. But he did it because he started management development right from the beginning. And with our clients looking around the country, we've seen them start succession plans in their mid-30s, certainly by their mid-40s. And if you haven't started the succession plan by your mid-50s, you're going to have to accelerate whatever you do. We have one of our clients who hung on long enough for his son to decide he could run the company. Well, by the time the son decided he could run the company, he was 63 years old, and he said, Dad, I want to retire in 2 years.
The dad was out of luck.
So we were brought in to go outside and recruit a new CEO that could be mentored by the 87-year-old father and the 63-year-old son. And now we're finding out the son is not sure he wants to retire. And so therefore, the person we've recruited who has a contract is saying, hey, what's going on? So we have to get back down and talk to him again and say, you know what, we better continue with this plan. So we spend a lot of time on this. It takes 3 or 4 years to bring someone in, have them understand the culture, and be able to run the company. So better if you can do it internally and start from early on to groom people.
I want to ask the obvious then. Why should people have the succession plan in place?
Well, first of all, if they don't have a good succession plan and they get to a certain level of debt, their bank will cut them off if they don't have a succession plan.
Yeah.
Banks more and more are asking that question: who is your successor? They're going further. Who is the successor to your vice president of sales? Who's your successor to your chief financial officer? In other words, if you don't have bench strength, you're not going to have financing capability, just like you couldn't go public without having bench strength. You have to have bench strength for financing. But also you have to have bench strength so you can take time away and smell the roses and enjoy your family, enjoy your hobby, and lengthen your life. Because if you keep your nose to the grindstone and you can't get away, then you're chained to the oars. And something happens to you, you go down and the company goes down.
It's good advice. Always keep us thinking too. So, well, Dick, this book on business manner lessons on leadership and life. I want to get to this, but I need to take a quick break, and then after we come back, I want to go into the what inspired this and the things that we should know. We'll be right back after these messages.
Since you can't take your wealth with you, spend time with your family.
Welcome back. I'm here today with Dick Buxton. He is the author of the book Business Matters, Lessons in Leadership and Life. And Dick, I have to ask you, this is not your first book.
No, it's my third book.
Okay. What inspired you to write this book?
A good friend of mine, Dr. Diane Love, called me, and her husband had written the introduction to my last book, Secrets of 11 Wise Men. And she had read it. She liked it. She liked the idea of a novella to tell a story. And then, of course, the first book had the novella as 1/3, the bios of 11 brilliant men as another third, and then my concept on management and leadership in the last third. She said, she's an executive coach, one of the top executive coaches in the country. She said, I am doing a lot of executive coaching with private companies in the family arena. And she'd done a lot of research. She said, you know that 80 to 90% of all companies in America are family owned. I didn't know that. I knew there were a lot of them. And she furthermore said that they employ 60% of the workforce in America, and they create 78% of all new jobs. I said, well, I knew they were big, and I didn't know that big. He said, well, I'd like to write a book directed to the family company. And so I said, well, okay, I'll help you. She said, no, I want you to co-author it. So I agreed to do it, and so we wrote the book together. You know this as a longtime advisor to family companies, that the next generation may be competent but not prepared to take over as a CEO. With proper training, they can eventually learn how to do it. But many times the next generation in a family is not competent, and the current CEO is not aware of that, and is in for a rude surprise when they decide to retire. Young Willie takes over, and all the other management team leave, and the company goes under because Willie has not been accepted by the management team. Or there's no family member, competent or not, who wants to succeed the current CEO, and the family doesn't want to sell the company. So succession planning early on is necessary to find out whether you can perpetuate the company or you have to get the company ready to sell. And even if you get the company ready to sell, you better have competent management for the buyer to look at, and not the people that are going to leave as soon as they sell the company.
You know, it's so interesting as the founders of the company think about how they transition, and they may have a plan that my kids are going to come in. And I remember I joined GrowCo some 25 years ago, and the founding partner at that time, his son had just joined a year earlier. So the thought was that together we would retire Dad, and the succession plan would take place. Well, about 7-8 years into this plan, the son leaves.
Yep.
And there I'm left with the two other partners, and they looked at me and they said, "What do you want to do, Alan?"
There you
I
go.
said, well, so it's so life can be interesting, but you've come back, you bring this back full circle to talk about the lessons in life, and I think that there's a reality check there, because sometimes the person may come from an entitlement standpoint. My dad was the founder, so therefore I should inherit that. And you clearly indicated that acceptance is a key.
You bet.
So when you're working with people on succession plans, and you have this issue of father to son, the intra-family, is there a way that you can prepare that next generation?
Yes, there is. I'll give you an example of one situation. A company down in Texas, run by the founder, largest company in their field in that state. In fact, one of the largest companies in the country in that field. And he called me and told me he'd heard about us from a friend of his up in Amarillo, and where we'd done a succession plan. He said, "I have a son who thinks he's going to take over the company from me, and he's not." And I haven't really broached the idea to him because I don't want to hurt him. But we need to do something so that he can have a role in the management of the company when I retire, and I have a health problem, and I may have to retire sooner than later. So would you come down? I'd like to talk to you about it. I said, fine. And I did. I flew in and went to this restaurant. They had a private room, and I walked back, and not only was the founder there and his son there, but his number 2 man was there, and 8 other key people were there. And we sat down. He was down at the end of the table. I'm back at this end, and the other people are lining both sides of the table. The founder, who was in his mid-70s, one of the grand old Southern gentlemen, said, "Mr. Buxton is here because my son thinks he's going to take over the company, but he's not." I looked at the son's reaction. Whoa! He said, "The reason for it is he's not ready. I think he could be ready someday, but only if," and then he pointed to his general manager, "only if Bob agrees to take him under his wing and train him. And Bob, would you be willing to do that if Mr. Buxton could set up a program for you to own some of the company right now?" Bob said, "Yes, sir." He said, "But I can't do it without the other men at this table. And they'd have to accept me, and they'd have to accept your son." And he said, "Well, Mr. Buxton's going to find out whether they will or not." And he said, "Okay, now let's order dinner and enjoy ourselves." That was the introduction. The next morning I walked into the founder's office and I said, "Well, you have thrown a hand grenade right in the middle of your management team." He said, "Yep, by design." He said, "You go in and fix it." He said, "They're all waiting for you."
Yeah.
So I walked in, I said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. Carl, you and Bob together will be trustees of a trust. Your other 8 associates here will buy some stock in the company, exchange it for shares of beneficial interest in a voting trust. Carl, you'll buy some stock and exchange it. Bob, you'll buy some stock. We're going to do a tender offer for all the stock not owned by employees to have that stock to be resold to you guys. And then we're going to develop a management stock ownership plan so that if something happens to the founder, a team will take over from the founder. And the quarterback of that team will be Bob until, Carl, you're ready, if you're ever ready. Are you okay with that, Carl?" He said, "I better be." He said, "My father's made it very clear I'm not going to step into his shoes unless I'm properly trained." Well, today Carl is the chairman of the board of that company because his father passed away. Bob passed away. The 8 key men are all still with the company, only now the management stock ownership plan has 30 people in it. We have management stock ownership plans with 75 people in them and 10 people in them. But we develop a plan, many times a voting trust, where people get skin in the game and they invest more than they can afford to lose. And that's the acid test. If they're not willing to invest in the company, they're not going to be given senior responsibilities. They'll have to have skin in the game.
I love the way you put that. They got to have skin in the game.
They have to.
So, Dick, you've done this thousands of times, succession planning, and a person, for the sake of our listeners, if they want to contact you for more information how they build a succession plan, where do they go?
We have a terrific website, privatecapitalcorp.com.
Okay.
And all these you ever wanted to know about us, but we're afraid to ask.
Okay. And then once again, this book, Business Matters, Lessons in
On
Leadership
Amazon.
and Life.
On Amazon.
And on Amazon.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure having you here today on the show.
Great being here.
We've been visiting here today with Dick Buxton. He is the author of the book, Business Matters, Lessons in Leadership and Life. And we'll be right back after these messages.